The war in Gaza has been particularly deadly for journalists.
Their work is really vital. We rely on journalists to be our eyes and ears in a conflict so that we know, as the international community, what is happening.
Plus, the EU will soon decide if Ukraine should be a member.
I came here with a clear message of Ukraine's commitment to do its homework, to open accession talks and move towards membership in the EU.
And later, as COP28 is winding down, we'll hear from one of the participants in Dubai about what happened and what the challenges are. Today is Monday, December 11th, and this is VOA's Global Crises. Good evening, I'm Steve Karish in Washington. Fighting in the Gaza Strip intensified as Israel's Iron Dome air defense system warned of incoming rocket fire. At least one of Hamas's rockets struck a residential area near Tel Aviv. Meanwhile, Palestinians in the West Bank and Jerusalem went on a general strike on Monday. Commercial shops, educational facilities, and more were closed, and streets were empty in solidarity with Gaza. This as conditions in Gaza are worsening. Philippe Lazzarini is commissioner of UNRWA, the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees. He described an implosion of civil order where Gazans who have not eaten for days were looting aid distribution centers and stopping trucks on roads as they tried to secure supplies for their families.
We hear for the first time that hunger is prevailing in Gaza. More and more people haven't eaten for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. The last time I went was 2 weeks ago when I visited the vocational training center of Khan Younis, hosting more than 35,000 people. I could see already firsthand the level of despair, the level of dispossession. People lack absolutely everything.
Lazzarini was speaking to a delegation of UN Security Council envoys attending a meeting on the Egyptian border with Gaza to discuss the growing humanitarian crisis. And speaking of the UN Security Council, the U.S. vetoed a resolution calling for a ceasefire on Friday. It's a measure that will be brought up by the Council again on Tuesday. And amid growing criticism over its continued support of Israel's military operation in Gaza, the U.S. defended its stance on Sunday, but also reiterated the importance of protecting Palestinian civilians. Veronica Balderas Iglesias has that story.
More forcefully, with intensity. That's how Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu described Sunday the advances of his troops in Gaza.
In order to achieve all our goals, the elimination of Hamas, the return of all our abductees, and the promise that Gaza will never again be a threat to Israel.
Netanyahu also thanked the United States for vetoing a UN Security Council resolution last week that would have called for an immediate ceasefire. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken explained the decision when interviewed Sunday on ABC's This Week show.
With Hamas still alive, still intact, and again, with the stated intent of repeating October 7th again and again and again, that would simply perpetuate the problem.
As Blinken stressed the importance of providing Israel the support and weapons it needs to defend itself, he made it clear it is not without conditions.
Those rules apply to Israel as they do to any other country, including the way they're used and the imperative of respecting international humanitarian law.
But as the civilian death toll continues to rise in Gaza, the United States stance has been strongly criticized at the Doha Forum, which is held every year to discuss world challenges. Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Shtaya.
It's not up to Israel only. It is those who have given the Israelis the greenest of the green light to continue killing the Palestinians.
Ayman Safadi is Jordan's foreign minister.
In the United States, we had a very blunt conversation with Secretary Blinken. All of us, the Arab and Muslim delegation, were very clear. Our priorities are set. Stop the aggression, allow sufficient humanitarian supplies into all parts of Gaza, ensure protection of civilians.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, also a forum participant, said he'll continue appealing for a humanitarian ceasefire to be declared. And from Geneva, the chief of the World Health Organization, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, warned about the impact the war is having on the health environment in the Gaza Strip.
As more and more people move to a smaller and smaller area, overcrowding, combined with the lack of adequate food, water, shelter, and sanitation, are creating the ideal conditions for disease to spread.
He noted his organization has deployed teams to support health workers on the ground who are physically and mentally exhausted. Veronica Valderas Iglesias, VOA News, Washington.
The loss of life among Israelis on October 7th and among civilians in Gaza afterwards has been well documented, but perhaps less well known is the fact that in the first 2 months of the Israel-Gaza war, a record number of journalists and aid workers have also been killed. VOA's Christina Casiedo-Smith has the story.
The October 7 Hamas terror attack in southern Israel claimed the war's first media casualty. Yaniv Zohar, known for regularly being first on the scene for breaking news, had a long career with outlets including the Associated Press and an Israeli newspaper. Hamas killed the video journalist and his family. A few days later, a strike on the Lebanese border killed Reuters journalist Issam Abdallah and seriously injured several others. Analysis by Reuters and others says Israeli tank fire killed the video journalist. Findings showed the Israeli Defense Forces, or IDF, knew the location of the news team. 2 shells were fired in quick succession, an apparent deliberate attack on civilians that could constitute a war crime, analysts say. IDF's international spokesman responded to the findings, saying Israel does not target journalists. Abdallah and Zohar are 2 of the more than 60 journalists killed in a conflict described by the Committee to Protect Journalists, or CPJ, as the deadliest on record. Their loss has an impact on audiences, say analysts.
Their work is really vital. We rely on journalists to be our eyes and ears in a conflict so that we know, as the international community, what is happening.
The conflict has killed thousands of civilians, including more than 130 United Nations relief workers. Outside the UN headquarters in New York, aid group Doctors Without Borders held a vigil to remember colleagues killed in Gaza. Given the loss of human life, the Secretary General has invoked Article 99 of the UN Charter.
Article 99 states, and I quote, that the Secretary General may bring to the attention of the Security Council any matter in his opinion that may threaten the maintenance of international peace and security.
With international media largely blocked from reporting inside Gaza, local journalists play a vital role.
It's clear that combatants on both sides will try and twist stories to their advantage. And having the more people we have reporting, the better we are likely to be able to get a balanced view in the fullness of time of exactly what's happening.
The number of journalists killed in the first 2 months of this war surpasses that of wars in Iraq, where CPJ data shows 32 killed in all of 2006, and Syria, where 31 cases were documented in 2012. Watchdogs are calling for accountability.
It's really important for us to document every single case of a journalist killed, because we want to ensure that those killings and those deaths are investigated and those who are responsible are held accountable.
As the temporary ceasefire to release hostages and prisoners ends and Israel resumes fighting Hamas inside Gaza, analysts predict the toll for civilians, aid workers, and the journalists trying to tell their stories will rise. Christina Casiedo-Smith, VOA News.
You're listening to Flashpoint Global Crises from the Voice of America. I'm Steve Karish in Washington. An update from COP28 in Dubai later in the show, but now we check in on the crisis in Ukraine. A series of loud explosions rang out in Ukraine's capital overnight as Russia fired ballistic missiles at Kyiv early on Monday. Laurie London gets an update from Anna Chernikova.
It was quite a tough night for Ukraine. At first, Russian forces launched 18 drones targeting south part of the country. All 18 drones were destroyed in Mykolaiv region. And then it was a couple of hours of silence. However, around 4 a.m., Russian forces launched another attack using 8 ballistic missiles, which were targeting the city of Kyiv particularly. According to Ukrainian air defense, all ballistic missiles were destroyed. However, there are quite a lot of damage and even destruction of the residential buildings in the city of Kyiv, and 4 people were also reported wounded. What's important in this attack that basically the sound of explosions were heard before the air raid alarm was on. However, it was already the sound of the air defense action. Myself, I woke up due to the sound of explosion because it was as I mentioned, it was a siren on over the night in Kyiv. So it was quite a nervous morning because definitely the explosions were quite powerful.
Turning to Ukraine's bid to gain membership in the European Union, I know relations between Budapest and Kyiv have been increasingly strained as Hungary has continued to block EU aid for Ukraine and sanctions against Russia. But it sounds like there may be somewhat of at least a warming this week, with Ukraine's foreign minister meeting with his Hungarian counterpart?
Yes, exactly. I should mention that this week is extremely important for Ukraine because on December 14th and 15th, it will be a summit on Ukrainian question hold. And basically, the most important for Ukraine at this point is to get understanding if Budapest will continue to threaten to block all EU decisions regarding Ukraine and particularly regarding Ukrainian membership, because this is exactly what this meeting will be about. And today, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Dmytro Kuleba, confirmed that he will personally meet his counterpart, Peter Siatro. It will be the first meeting during full-scale invasion. And at this point, definitely there is a hope within the Ukrainian society that at least certain decisions will be taken, and maybe the situation will be slightly different and better for Ukraine, considering all previous announcement by official Budapest.
We'll check back with you next week to find out more about how that went. I know that it's a big concern for Ukraine, and it's an important step that they'd like to take to get membership in the EU.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
Laurie London hosts Flashpoint Ukraine here on the Voice of America. She was speaking with VOA's Anna Chernikova in Kyiv. Meanwhile, Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba said on Monday that it would be devastating for Kyiv and for the European Union if EU leaders do not give his country the green light for membership talks at a summit later this week.
I came here with a clear message of Ukraine's commitment to do its homework, to open accession talks and move towards membership in the EU. I cannot imagine, I don't even want to talk about the devastating consequences that will occur shall the Council fail to make this decision, not only with regard to Ukraine, but in a broader sense on the issue of enlargement as a whole. As I told you, we did our homework. We expect the European Union to do its homework, and we will be talking with member states ahead of the Council.
The leaders will meet on Thursday and Friday to decide whether to launch membership negotiations with Kyiv and to grant it 50 billion euros of economic support, and they'll discuss how to continue military aid for Ukraine's defense against Russia's invasion. Securing new financial assistance from Europe is critical as doubts mount over the future of U.S. support for Kyiv, which relies heavily on Western financial aid. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is visiting Washington this week. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who boasts about his ties with Russian President Vladimir Putin, has threatened to veto the aid and enlargement talks at the EU summit. Kuleba says that Ukraine has already taken steps to appease Hungary.
I'm seeing Hungarian foreign minister today. This will be our first meeting since the beginning of the in-person meeting, since the beginning of the large-scale invasion, and I think this very fact speaks for itself, that we continue dialogue, we talk to Hungary, and as I just said, Ukraine changed its legislation on education and the use of language of national minorities in the way Hungary wanted it to be changed. And this fact must be respected.
Meanwhile, Ukraine pushes for more global support as Russia's president says he will seek a fifth term in the Kremlin. Kyiv's bid to join the EU seems frozen as its troops prepare for another winter at war. VOA's Arash Arabasadi has the story.
Ukrainian soldiers again ready for winter combat, blanketed by the snow-covered fields of western Poland. The exercise takes place in underground trenches, simulating the fighting soldiers so far have faced, even if most of these trainees have never seen combat, according to one of the Ukrainian soldiers here. Over the weekend, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky traveled to Buenos Aires to attend the inauguration of new Argentine President Javier Milei. Zelensky was there to shore up support from the global south for Ukraine's ongoing war with Russia. Before his trip and from Kyiv, Zelensky recently signed bills into law, one specifically to appease Hungary in a bid to clear a path to Ukraine's EU membership. One of the biggest roadblocks to that membership is Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who recently met in Paris with French President Emmanuel Macron. Orban recently appeared in a televised interview from Hungary's capital, Budapest. Orban repeatedly said he opposed Ukraine's membership in the EU, saying it would take 5 to 10 years to first conclude a strategic partnership. Orban is considered one of Europe's top allies of Russian President Vladimir Putin, as well as a spoiler for Ukraine's EU membership, as the 27-nation bloc requires unanimous approval to absorb a new country. Meanwhile, at a Friday ceremony in Moscow, Putin awarded soldiers who fought in Ukraine while announcing he would again seek the presidency in 2024. If, as expected, Putin wins re-election, that would keep him in power through at least 2030. The 71-year-old Putin has already served longer than any Russian leader since Joseph Stalin. But just outside, in the streets of Moscow, the political team of jailed Putin opposition leader Alexei Navalny was already at work creating billboards with a seemingly innocuous New Year's greeting. The message, however, contained a QR code that took viewers to a Not Putin website. Authorities soon removed the signs, and Navalny continues serving his more than 30-year prison sentence. In Ukraine, a push to erase all traces of Russian rule. Municipal workers took down the statue of a field commander from the Russian Civil War. A local councilman said it would now live in a museum. In Ukraine's Kharkiv region, this modern war wages on as a recent Russian missile strike killed at least one person and injured several others. According to CNN, Western intelligence assessments warn Russia is likely to increase such attacks on civilian infrastructure during the winter. And while civilians brace for more cold months at war, frontline soldiers fight to regain land in the country's south and east. VOA cannot independently verify the date or location of this video from Reuters, but Ukrainian forces say it shows the latest push to recapture cities like Bakhmut, seized by Russian forces this spring. Arash Arabasadi, VOA News.
As negotiations wind down in Dubai, the world is waiting to see the results of the COP28 climate conference. However, getting everyone there to agree on the text for a final statement has been challenging. I'm joined by Sherelle Blazer, Senior Director of the Sierra Club's International Climate and Policy Campaign.
You have to come to consensus between, every country, which is, the parties. And so really the controversy is between really OPEC countries, mostly, not wanting to use the words fossil fuel phase out in the text, and it being important that we do name fossil fuels and not just coal, and not just emissions with regard to a phase out. Because, of course, if we want to get to net zero by 2050, then.
And what's the Sierra Club's take on all this? What are you hoping to see?
Sierra Club is hoping to see a fast phase out of fossil fuel sources so that we can get to net zero and start to stay within, the 1.5 degree warming that we've been warned, that the science says is necessary, and the IPCC has warned, will help us to avoid the most catastrophic version of climate crisis.
Well, that's what you're hoping to see in the long run. With respect to COP28 specifically, would it be better to maybe give a little on the language of the final agreement, to not come down so hard on fossil fuels, to get those OPEC countries on board for future cooperation?
Well, this is what the 28th COP. I don't know. That seems like seeing how short time is and how long we've been at this. If we had more time on our hands, I might agree with you. But at some point, we do have to say, okay, the science is clear. We have to phase out of these fossil fuels if we want to stay alive, if we don't want food, shortages, and we don't want drought and, catastrophic climate conditions, then we do have to at least agree to start pulling back on fossil fuels, which isn't a big ask, right? This is not something that will happen tomorrow. This is just something for us to all work toward.
So the science is clear. We do need to cut back on fossil fuels if we're going to prevent this climate disaster from coming. What can the average citizen do? It's one thing to talk about what the governments are going to do, what groups like the Sierra Club or the large corporations are going to do. But what can the average citizen do to mitigate some of these coming problems?
I feel like, and this is my personal opinion, people do what is cultural. And unfortunately, we have a culture and a society that is dependent on fossil fuels, everything from plastics to, the way that our mode of transportation. And so really we are depending on governments to change the culture, to change the policy so that we can begin moving in a different way with market mechanisms and, products that are available to us. And you know what I mean? So, I'm all for people recycling and, not having the plastic straws and all of those good things. All of that's great. Turn off your lights, all that good stuff. But really, it's going to take widespread and massive culture change to really handle the climate crisis.
That's Sherelle Blazer. She's Senior Director of the Sierra Club's International Climate and Policy Campaign. She was joining me from COP28 in Dubai.